Now introduce you to our speaker for today, who is a wonderful new board member of Orchestra of the Schools and a very talented music therapist, Cathy Rivera.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, when I was asked to do this talk as part of this particular fundraising occasion, I didn't realize what following the trio was going to mean. And that's a tough act to follow, because now I'm going to be just using speech for a while here, boring, compared to the wonderful enlightenment that music brings to us. However, I hope that the suggestions and information that I present gives you some further insight into why is that so. And so, in addition to talking about neurologic music therapy, which is the basis for the therapy that I've practiced for 17 years, I also wanted to talk about that there is a shared basis for why music helps in therapy and why music supports child development, because there is a common basis, I believe, the literature supports. So there will be this introduction not only to music therapy in general, but to specifically neurologic music therapy, why we think it works, and then the most commonly asked question whenever I speak, whether it's in a formal situation like this or just casually, is, well, what does that look like? Mm-hmm. God willing, my video will show to you, and you'll be able to hear how it works. Again, I'm developing probably not a novel thesis, but one for our purposes today that I thought worked really well. Why music would help with child development, and just give you a little insight as to what I found in the literature supports that idea. So first, what even is music therapy? We have with us today one of the other two music therapists in Monterey County, Christina Farnsworth. And not a lot of people get an opportunity to be even exposed to music therapy on the Central Coast. Just a show of hands, has anyone worked with a music therapist? Didn't think so. And that's unfortunate. And we have made some inroads. We have a brand new music therapist who has just moved to Monterey County. So hopefully that will not be the case the next time I speak to a group this size. But what is it anyway? What makes it different from what we do for ourselves, which is to throw on a CD when we're doing the dishes because it's a boring thing to do and it helps you get through it? Or we put on some relaxing music in the evening because we're going to gear down for the evening and we're thinking about going to bed. We just want to relax. That's very intuitive. Music affects us that way. I think we can all agree. But music in therapy is much more directed than that. It's the planned use of music. And it's performed by a board-certified music therapist. And all therapy, we hope, is going to affect a change in behavior, whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, psychotherapy. So a music therapist board certified, that's part of the alphabet soup that goes after my name, MTBC, is, we hope, both compassionate and very well-practiced musician, just to qualify for the job. But what is behind MTBC is at minimum a 4-year university degree. There are dozens now, well, probably in 200, programs throughout the United States at universities that offer a 4-year university degree in music therapy. In addition to that academic training, we have a 6-month full-time supervised internship that's required. And in most cases, that internship still is unpaid. So it's a 6-month extension of a 4-year degree program before you are qualified then to sit for a national board exam. Now, once you become board certified and you are practicing, you still have an obligation, like, of course, most other professionals, to commit to continuing education as you go out and practice music therapy. Now, neurologic music therapy in particular was developed by my major professor, Dr. Michael Tout, who was at that time at Colorado State University. And it is based on the ideology or the understanding we know of diseases that stem from cognitive, sensory, emotional, motor dysfunctions stemming from the brain. So what kind of populations did I see, or have I seen? Well, one obvious one would be with someone whose brain has been injured, accident, or someone whose brain is being compromised by a disease process like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis. Or perhaps it's an individual who has been brought into the world with a genetic disorder that affects development. One of the large populations that music therapists see today, both in schools and in clinics, are individuals on the autism spectrum. Now, there are some psychiatric diagnoses, as these named, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, attention deficit, and depression, that we know have a neurologic source. We understand enough that we can even look into the brain in imaging now and see where the disease process has created a firing pattern or functional pattern that is deviant from baseline. So understanding that etiology then allows neurologic music therapy to have appropriate application. And then I had the good fortune also to work here in Monterey County in hospice and in palliative care, where the obvious cause of the problem is one that is going to end probably someone's life, and their neurologic processes are going to be reflective of someone who is at the end of their life. So, we have had the benefit in the last 15 and 20 years of the advance of techniques and technologies that allow us to look at the brain in action without the person having to be deceased. Instead of having a lab slide of somebody's brain, we can actually in real time image the activity. So when you look at your brain on music, and this is an individual who was just listening to music, we see brain activity, which through the magic of technology gets translated in a color that we can see. And as you can see, and this is only half of a brain, that's one hemisphere, right? We have two, right and left. Our brain is activated throughout the brain, and it not only is activated on the right side, which was our general understanding of music as a, quote, right brain activity, it's activated equally on the left. So it's a whole brain experience. Now, music is an organization of elements that I think you'd all recognize. The rhythm, the tempo, the sound, timbre of the instruments, the melodies, the harmonies, that all are the elements of music. Well, it turns out that our brain actually perceives them and processes them all across the brain. And that perception can be instantaneous, especially in the case of rhythmic perception. And the brain structures that are responsible for it, the auditory system, and then the response system is deep in the oldest parts of our brain, and it's very, very immediate and requires absolutely no processing in the frontal lobe or actually any other part of the brain. So it is instantaneous, immediate, and universal. So then we have a brain response, and in the case of rhythm, it's what we call entrainment, or a synchronization with an external stimulus. So we have a metronomic beat, or we have the drummer in a band, or timpani in an orchestra establishing a beat, and throughout the audience, every single brain is perceiving that immediately, and by the third pulse, at a regular interval, the brain is anticipating where the fourth one is going to fall. And this is universal. It doesn't matter if you have been trained as a musician or studied music, can read music. As long as you can perceive the stimulus, your brain will organize around it. It's very, very immediate. But there's a whole lot of other brain responses to these elements of music, including neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters have to move between the synapses of all the neurons in the brain and just, I hate to say it, like a computer, they're either on or they're off. And these neurotransmitters are part of the brain's response, especially to things like melody and harmony. Is it a sad song? Is it a happy song? Is it a song that I associate with something else? Now all of a sudden the frontal lobe is involved. All right, so there's an immediate response. I recognize that song. Sometimes some people can recognize a song within 4 notes of a melody, especially if they're playing in the right rhythm. But then a lot of other things happen in the brain. All brain response can be observed in one way or the other through our behavior. And we, of course, we have all kinds of behaviors. Again, going to the rhythmic response, one of the first things that happens is we move paced by a rhythmic stimulus. You could go all the way to dancing, or you could go all the way down to tapping your foot or tapping your finger when you hear a regular rhythmic stimulus. You might breathe according to the pace of that stimulus. It might be unconscious. You're not even really thinking about it. That's one of the reasons why most of us don't listen to fast-paced, loud, raucous music when we're trying to relax and slow down. Now, I've been part of studies where we've actually gotten people's heart rate to slow by slowing the music down to a resting heart rate pace. And their blood pressure followed. So it is a behavior that isn't even necessarily something that, again, we have to think about. Music affects mood and thinking. How does that happen? Those neurotransmitters, oh, it's turned on the dopamine system. Oh, we like that. Pleasure system, yes, the same thing that a martini gives us, and any other pleasurable stimulus. And when your mood has been affected, any cognitive behavioral therapist will tell you your thinking is affected, your attitude, your outlook, your receptiveness to novelty, to new ideas, to changing patterns of behavior. Music is a powerful effector. We know it happens immediately in the brain, and it comes out in behaviors. So, why do we think music might be helpful in therapy? It's a whole brain experience. When there's been damage to the brain, or there's degeneration of the brain, as say in a Parkinson's person with the advance of the disease, losing more and more regulation of the motor system, other parts of the brain that aren't affected are still going to be responding to that musical stimulus. So now you can bring from the outside into the brain a compensating regulator, music. We've also been able to see from good studies that brain training and retraining to music actually happens faster and more forcefully or more effectively than the exact same training without the music. It's actually very simple to do in physical rehabilitation. You're trying to help somebody regain the ability to walk after a stroke. One set of matched people does the therapy as the physical therapist prescribes it without any music, just following directions to walk left, right, or to walk a certain distance, or to do a repeated exercise. And the other group does the exact same exercises, but they do it to music. Their advance of being able to reclaim their physical rehabilitation happens faster in the music group. And after you've discontinued therapies altogether, it actually lasts longer than the therapeutic period in the music group than it does in the non-music group. And those are clinical studies that have not only been performed as I studied them and was part of in the early 2000s, but they've been replicated now. So there are a few negative side effects also to music, which is quite welcome, especially when working with clients who, they need medications. I am not at all proposing that people only get music therapy instead of getting any of their medicines or other therapies. But unlike some things that you add to a person's therapeutic regime, there's very few negative interactions. And in fact, there is usually an enhancement. So, how does music learning affect childhood development? There's a large body of research out. Music education has been studying this and using it as foundational knowledge to implement music education in all children's general education. It's controversial if you review articles on these studies. They are behavioral studies. We're looking at a set of kids who study music and a set of kids matched that don't, and we're observing behavior. We're giving them standardized tests. But there is consensus around these outcomes, whatever criticisms people might have of various individual studies and how they were done. There is evidence that there's enhanced language skills in the group of children, matched children, that were studying musical instruments in particular, and those that weren't. There's advanced literacy and readiness for reading. There's advanced numeracy and ability to do mathematics. There's even advanced intellectual development to the point where it's measurable in their IQs. There's increased creativity. If you send a set of young children who've been doing organized music activities, same age children, and these can be very young children, 3 to 5, 6-year-old children. And you take the group that has been exposed to music and the group that has not in their planned experience time. And the kids who have been working with music in their developmental play are actually more creative. They're more imaginative. They are more open to exploration of new things. Also can measure improved social and personal development, especially if you look at the adolescent range of age in children. Children who study music as adolescents tend to have more robust social ties, social engagement, and personal development. Much like you heard testimony today, I was just thrilled to hear it come out of their mouths. I'm more patient and I know what it takes to work hard to achieve something. It's something that is the byproduct of studying music in a young adult. They've even found that playing music enhances your immune system so that studying and playing music in school actually contributes to overall health and well-being in children. So these are all things that were observable and measurable. And again, there sometimes is criticism that these studies aren't replicable or the study didn't have enough children in it. But if you do an overview, a meta-analysis of all of these studies, you find these conclusions all converge. Why would that be? Well, just like our belief that you can use music in therapy, there's a neural basis for this difference in brain development between children who study music and children who don't. They now, through imaging study, not only are replicating some of these outcome behavioral studies, but they're matching them with brain scans and finding that there is indeed, in as little as 15 months in kids from 5 to 7, a difference in gray matter in the area of the auditory cortex, the sensory motor cortex, and the occipital lobe, of course, where we see from, that is measurable. Now, it is much more dramatic in older children who've been studying music for at least 4 or 5 years. Repetition, more layers and patterns and connections of neurons developing in these areas of the brain, of course, because we've been doing it for longer. So that change in the brain conformation is even more pronounced in these older children. This other change is of particular interest to me because the mirror neurons in our brain are the ones that allow us to make sense of what we're seeing in very sophisticated terms. The face, I am looking at the face of my friend. I am looking at the face of my mother. And what does that tell you? All kinds of things. As soon as baby recognizes mom's face, you usually get a great big smile. In autistic individuals, these neurons under fire. And so we get children on the autism spectrum who have very little effective response. They don't smile at you. They don't like to look at you. And that includes their very own mother. I don't know how many of you had company with autistic, especially autistic children, and it is just really striking. And it's not a character flaw. It's because they actually have something in their brain that is not working in the normal range, okay? In children who study music, they have enhanced mirror neurons. Why? Because they are watching a model, how you hold the instrument, how you bow an instrument, where you put your fingers on the keyboard. Are your shoulders up around your ears or your shoulders down? Who shows you that? Your teacher shows you that. And that skill of inferring from that sort of modeling with the mirror neurons is what we use to learn anything, especially social skills. Our cues. Is that person mad at me? Is what I'm doing upsetting someone else, or is it making them happy? So a child who has been studying music has a leg up on life and truly is someone who is going to measure on these measures of behavior advanced over their peers who do not get music education. So I am proposing there is a shared basis for the use of music in therapy and in child development. And that shared basis is brain plasticity. The idea that once you're a certain age, your brain's never going to change could not have been more wrong. It is true we don't make a lot of new brain cells. That part is right. But we have an seemingly unending capacity for making new brain connections. And those neural pathways is what shows up as a change in conformation in the brain when they're appearing in there with those scans. So through learning, and specifically music learning, and the rehearsal of new experiences, the actual brain circuitry is remodeled. And it is then transferable to non-musical skills. Such an important basis for why music therapy. Do we just want to make someone in a wheelchair into a musician? Well, that's liable to happen after a while, that's true. But more importantly, the skills that we're practicing through music for that person in the wheelchair is going to transfer to the skills they need to get back into their life. So, what does this look like? This gentleman was someone that I worked with actually as an intern in Austin, Texas. He had an unfortunate meeting with a deer while he was riding a motorcycle. Very highly accomplished entrepreneur in the tech industry. Actually a man of considerable means as a result of that. But terribly, terribly debilitated by this accident. By the time I met him, they had him up out of a wheelchair because he was determined to walk his daughter down the aisle when she got married. However, he wasn't walking very good, and we were doing what we call gait training to normalize his walking using music. Fast forward about 4 years after that point, I was back in Austin now working as a private music therapist. And I heard that this man was now in a wheelchair and was no longer walking. And I said, did he have another accident? And they said, no. His dementia has advanced to the point where he just seems to have forgotten how to walk. And now we're having to use a wheelchair to get him around anymore. And I said, I would really like to work with him. Actually, his family came to me and they said, do you think you could work with him and see if we can't keep this from sliding into where he's going to be wheelchair or bedbound? The man wasn't even 60 years old at this point. And I said I would surely try, because Doug, I can use his name by permission, loved music. And he was actually a pretty good amateur musician. Well, he was no longer speaking. And at the point we started working, no longer walking. But this is about week 6 of our working together. And I was convincing him that we could go out and he could walk if he would walk with the music. And you'll hear, I hope, that not only is he walking to the music, it's a 3-point gait, but he's still walking in time to the music. He's singing harmony to my lead. So the challenge they gave me is like, can you get this man from the door to the bus? Because we're having to wheelchair him out there, and we've got to do the transfer and everything. And I said, I think we can do it. In 6 weeks, we were walking down the sidewalk just fine. Now, the therapists and attendants say, well, am I going to have to sing I've been working on the railroad every time? And I said, well, it wouldn't hurt, at least to get him started. And I said, you get him started, and you can see he can sing the song himself, and he will probably keep walking. So really, really powerful stuff. He had not lost the ability to walk. He had lost his ability to organize around the idea of walking. But by reaching deep into musical memory, by giving him the immediate auditory rhythmic stimulus, he was able to pull it all together again, just like riding a bike. And he was back on his feet. All right. Jenny was a young woman when I met her, 32 years old, who had suffered a deep brain stroke and had ended up in a nursing home after major hospitalization. Never did figure out why she had the stroke, but she was completely locked in, unable to speak, unable to move, and only able to breathe on her own, or else I would never have met her. By the time they did come to me, she had been, of course, to all the therapies, physical, occupational, speech, and all they could do was get her into a wheelchair. And both her family and Jenny could say with her eyes, because she could blink twice for yes, one for no, that she wanted to be able to do more. I was very fortunate her family was a family of means. And they had built her a handicap accessible home. She was a musician. She was a Sunday school teacher who used to use music with her Sunday school students. Her goal was to be able to return to her Sunday school classroom and play music with her students. And I mean, and considering where she had come from, laying in a hospital bed and only being able to blink, you would think, well, that's never going to happen. However, by the time we got to working, again, this is about a year into working with her, and I usually saw her once a week, we were bringing back volitional movement in one plane with her hand, and I just put an auto harp up underneath her hand and a pick, an adapted pick, and let her go. And music was highly motivating for her. We moved from arm movement to finger movement, especially with her right hand, which was her right side of her body was coming back faster than the left side. In fact, you see, we actually kept it restrained because it would wander and be a real distraction. She didn't have any control over it. But we moved on to working at a keyboard, and I do have film footage of that, but we could be here all day watching Jenny. Believe me, you could. But the end, and she's not done yet, But at the end of our therapeutic experience together, she was using her fingers to play on a keyboard. And the talk about transfer of skills, it allowed her to be able to control a mouse and a typepad keyboard on a computer, all right? So now all of a sudden she had an avenue to go from being completely locked in and unable to communicate to the outside world. What had she been thinking, or what is she thinking now? She's now writing a book about her experience of having suffered this incredible interruption in her life. She has 3 children who must be pretty darn grown up right now, because this is at least 10, this is 11 years old.